to rock and roll the coming week. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about tariffs. Why? What is the legal basis that we're going to talk about regarding tariffs? Okay. So, let me sit up straight here so I have good posture. All right. So, the bottom line with tariffs, constitutionally speaking, is the president of the United States does not have power to regulate taxes. Okay, because that's ultimately what this ends up being in the form of increased prices. Okay, and normally the entity who controls taxes and payments and distributions and monetary items in the U.S. is the Congress, not the president. So Article 1 of the Constitution makes that clear. Now, there's an exception where, for emergency measures, the president can, put tariffs and charge tariffs to other countries. But the fact is, there was no and is no emergency. It's made up, it's make believe. Okay, the president has simply said that there is an emergency. No, not much different than when he says and has said there's an invasion in the southern border. There's not an invasion in the southern border. There never was. Okay, there's people that enter illegally, and if caught, they're put in removal proceedings and or removed to the U.S. to Mexico. There's not an invasion. Likewise, same with the tariffs. There is no emergency, and there was never an emergency. In fact, since the tariffs have begun, the economy in the U.S. has gone down. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost. Prices have gone up considerably. So, what exactly is a tariff? Okay, minus the fact the president does not and did not have authority to do this, and it's currently going to be decided at the Supreme Court. Now, I know what you're thinking, that the Supreme Court has given Trump unbelievable powers, that they've granted him immunity, that they've made it so that basically he can order SEAL Team 6 to kill a U.S. citizen and not be prosecuted. I have that same concern. I do have that same worry that the Supreme Court might bend over backwards to make it appear legal, and that's a valid concern. I mean, they have made law up, especially with presidential immunity. The whole thing about the United States, the backbone of the United States, is nobody's above the law, and the Supreme Court made the president above the law. And then later, the Supreme Court justice complains that people are not looking as favorably on the Supreme Court as they used to and not respecting their decisions like they used to. Well, there's a reason for that, because they bent over backwards and made up law to appease Trump. Okay, there have been cases that have come out where, thankfully, they followed the law. And believe me, I don't expect a conservative Supreme Court to always go the way or think that I'm thinking. That's not the issue. The issue is whether the decisions that they make are based in law. And lately, there's been several that have not been. And so the hope is when it gets to the Supreme Court, they will follow the law and they will say that the tariffs are not constitutional because no emergency existed. And basically, Trump made that up. Okay. And if that's the case, then billions of dollars will have to go back to companies who had to charge more and to people. So what is a tariff? Okay. There's a lot of people who think that, what Trump said is, well, we're going to impose tariffs and the other country's going to pay the price. And that's not true. Let's just take an example. Let's take one example. Let's say that there is a car, and let's just use a round figure. Let's say that the car cost $10,000. Okay, period. Let's say the car comes from Japan, $10,000. And let's say that Trump imposes a tariff of 10%, which basically is less than a lot of other ones he's tried to impose. Let's say 10%. So what that does is that turns that $10,000 car into an $11,000 car because 10% has to be paid. Now, who pays that? It's you. It's the consumer. It's not Japan. It's the consumer in the US that pays $1,000 more for that car. And what is that $1,000 considered? It's considered a tax. It's taxation without representation. The American people are paying taxes on pretty much everything they buy now without representation because the president pretended that there was an emergency and therefore gave the order to raise tariffs and make tariffs everywhere. And we see what's happening. Okay. Tariffs are made. The other country tries to come to the table, negotiate, gives Trump some kind of favorable whatever it is, and then he lowers the tariff. But for all intents purposes, everyday goods and not so everyday goods are being taxed to the American people in the form of a tariff. It's exactly why America became America in the first place, was taxation without representation. How back in the day, the 1700s, the King of England would tax all the Americans here in the US. They had no right to vote. They had no right to change it. They were just being taxed without being represented. That's what's happening here. If Congress doesn't vote for it, and by representation, we vote for the people in Congress. Congress then makes decisions, whether we like them or not, and they are representing us. But Congress was completely bypassed by all of the tariffs due to a fake emergency, thereby the president imposing the tariffs himself. So what we can hope is that when it gets to the Supreme Court, that they in fact rule based on the law and don't say things like, well, if the president said there's an emergency, then we have to leave it in the discretion of the president that there was an emergency. Okay, if tariffs worldwide are being imposed because of an emergency, it would be incumbent upon the Supreme Court to determine if, in fact, there was a real emergency, to look at the definition of emergency in this case, to see if it existed at the time that Trump said it did, and to see if it still exists at the present time. Okay, that would be the decision. So, I don't have a crystal ball, but we would hope that they would rule that the decision of an emergency was incorrect. There was no emergency, and therefore none of the tariffs issued previously are legal, and therefore all this money has to be returned. So I'm not sure how they would do it. Companies had to pay, the people had to pay. I just heard this morning that UPS is throwing out thousands of packages. Do you know why? Because they're at customs and they have to go through all this stuff for the tariffs to come in, and the tariffs aren't being paid, and they're just piling up, so they're having to throw out the packages. Okay. And on another note, you know how China used to buy all or hefty part of its soybeans from the U.S. Well, they just said, well, U.S. is going to impose tariffs on us. Forget it. We'll go get our soybeans elsewhere, thereby leaving all the soybeans farmers without a buyer or with very few buyers. This is what happens. Okay. It's hurting everybody. Okay. So, anyways, that's my spiel for today. Everybody have a good day.